All right. I'm Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, not for the first or second time, by Matthew Whalan, who is, commentator, Substacker, man about town. I know that right now he's actually writing something up for the Substack about the last thing I watched with him, which was Norm and Rabbi Shmuley. So looking forward to reading that. Otherwise, how's it been going?
Going all right. Yeah, long week. Glad it's Friday. Excited for the breakdown. Yeah, how about you?
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I'm trying to frantically finish a lot of things before I go to Michigan next week. But that's also one of the reasons that I thought it'd be nice to do an extra breakdown this week, since I'm not going to be able to do one next Thursday when we'd normally do it, because I am going to be in Michigan. So next Thursday night, so that's March 21st at 6 p.m., I'm going to be giving a talk for Metro Detroit DSA and Wayne State University YDSA at Wayne State University, the old main building, room 0103, called Debunking the Many Bad Arguments Made by Israel's Apologists in the West. So if you are around mid or southeastern Michigan next Thursday, do come check that out. I'm also going to be doing a thing for going to be guest lecturing in a couple of Matt McManus's classes and doing a thing for his Hegel reading group at the University of Michigan. Not sure if that one's public or not, but anyway, lot coming up. But yeah, I don't want to leave people, too bereft of content. So, figured we could do this. I expect that some of those bad arguments are going to be made here, because it seems like statistically impossible that if Ben Shapiro is spending an hour arguing with college students, that subject's not going to come up.
Bad arguments or Israel?
Both. Yeah, but in particular, yes, I think some of those bad arguments about Israel are probably going to come up, because this is this didn't happen like just now or anything, but it's certainly post October 7th. So the video is entitled Ben Shapiro versus the University of Wisconsin, which I was saying last night is kind of fun, because like that sort of makes it sound like the entire university got together to debate Ben Shapiro, as the students, professors, graduate students, cafeteria workers, there's everybody.
Just so it's a fair fight,
yeah, he's just that good, right?
Yeah, well, you can't send him in there against like a real champ,
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, right? Though, that like, I do think he's gotten a little. If we're gonna be really scrupulously fair, I do think Lesser Ben has gotten like a little bit better about this in the last couple of years, because I used to never see him debate anybody but random college students, and that's still most of it. Right. Like now there's like but like now I do see him actually arguing with grownups like from time to time. Like I said, not often. Right. But like, I know he did something with Stephen Bennell, right? The YouTuber otherwise known as Destiny, a while ago. And
that must an extremely hard, they both talk at like
yes
time speed, it's like
yeah
and like, yeah, we should let the listeners know this is not being played at like double speed.
Right,
Nor is
right. No. Just this is just how it sounds. Yeah, exactly. The speed has not been altered from the original video. Yes, those two people do both talk extremely fast. I haven't seen. I know that Destiny and Benny Morris just did something with Norm and somebody else who I'm not remembering on the Lex Friedman show that just came out. So I haven't seen the whole thing. The whole thing's like 5 hours. If we did it for a debate breakdown, it'd be like a 3-parter. But I have seen a couple of clips that have been going around of Norm being very normishly exasperated. Mr. Pinnell, right? So I expect we'll actually watch that one at some point. But in any case,
that's funny. I'd like to see that who can talk faster competition between Destiny.
Yeah, Shapiro and Destiny. Yeah,
rugged man.
Fair enough. Well, on that note, let's watch him talk to some college students.
Please help me give a warm Wisconsin welcome to Ben Shapiro. Thank you so much. Great to see you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you again. Well, last time I was here, it was 2016. It was a much smaller room. Some vocal protesters, so I see not all that much has changed. I want to start by saying a special thank you to the supporter of Young America's Foundation's Free to Choose lecture series and everybody who's involved in tonight's organizing and programming. Your civilization is better than Hamas's, and it is better than those of the people who sympathize with Hamas, and you should not be shy about that. Your civilization is better in every conceivable way. It is better in terms of freedom. It is better in terms of decency, and it is better materially. Again, you should not be shy about this in any way. Hamas's morality is evil. In the view of Hamas, the ultimate goal is the full destruction of all non-believers. To that end,
very small point, and I don't know why it bugs me so much, but like, you're clearly a monolingual English speaker. Why not just say Hamas? Like why do that like little K sound before the H? Like I don't really understand that.
Just so you can pause to think about the license it affords him to say whatever batshit crazy thing he's about to say, I guess.
Are willing to murder babies in their cribs and then to plant their own kids on top of rockets in order to maximize civilian casualties they can show off to the cameras. To that end, they celebrate raping women and murdering children, and they say it themselves. It is Hamas leader Mohammed Deeb who explains, quote, "Today you Israelis are fighting divine soldiers who love death for Allah the way you love life and who compete among themselves for martyrdom like you flee from death." It is Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh who says, "We love death like our enemies love life." Hamas brags about its actions and its goals. And we in the West somehow still fall for it, and the question is why? Why are there so many people in the West eager to make excuses for today's Nazis, barbarians who carve live children out of their pregnant mothers? Why are so many in the West trembling to find evidence of Israeli errors in their prosecution of war against Hamas so as to set up some sort of retroactive moral equivalence between the Jews and their genocidal neighbors? The answer comes in two flavors: complicity and cowardice. First, the complicit. There are those in the West who are perfectly willing to side with Hamas, perfectly willing to parrot all of their evils, to repeat all of their propaganda, all of their lies, because they do agree with Hamas about one key notion: that the West is evil and exploitative. These Hamas fellow travelers are members of the so-called decolonization coalition. They believe that the West, because it has been uniquely powerful historically, is also uniquely bad and uniquely sinful. and thus it must be torn down. They endorse the language of radical terror supporter Frantz Fanon, who declaimed in the 1960s that colonially oppressed peoples should, quote, utilize red-hot cannonballs and bloody knives to destroy their colonizers. And they endorse the ideas of Jean-Paul Sartre, who argued, quote, killing a European is killing two birds with one stone, eliminating in one go oppressor and oppressed, leaving one man dead and the other man free. Those who are powerful are the colonizers. Those who are powerless are the colonized. Everyone powerful is an oppressor. Everyone powerless is oppressed. Thus, we see the bizarre spectacle of queers for Palestine. People with LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign flags marching alongside those with Palestinian flags, who would quickly murder them if they gained power over them. The fellow travelers fill the streets these days. There's a reason the Black Lives Matter movement, with all of its violence and its lies and its falsehoods, declared itself in solidarity with Hamas immediately after the atrocities of October 7th. The coalition is real, and it is, in fact, disgusting. And then there are the cowards. The cowards have spent generations apologizing for Western civilization. They've refused to acknowledge two obvious truths. First, that Western civilization has, of course, committed atrocities and evils in the past. And second, that nevertheless, Western civilization is, in fact, better than its competitors. All civilizations throughout time have attempted to engage in colonization and exploitation. Only one civilization has spent its own blood to free slaves throughout the world. All civilizations have engaged in ruthless suppression. Only one civilization has spread liberty. All civilizations have engaged in economic imperialism. Only one civilization has spread prosperity. Western civilization is great because it has provided unique good and continues to do so right now. But the cowards refuse to believe that. It seems arrogant. It seems ethnocentric. It seems so passé. It seems discriminatory. And so instead, they create a dream world in their own head in which everybody thinks exactly the same way. Thus, the sins of evil groups like Hamas, those are actually just some sort of rational result of oppression. Wouldn't you also throw a baby in an oven if you were locked in an open-air prison? Well, I mean, perhaps not. Perhaps you would never throw a baby in an oven because you know you don't think like Hamas. But put that aside. Wouldn't you? Maybe. It must be Israel's fault, because if it's not, then perhaps not all civilizations are created equal. Perhaps some civilizations are better than others. And that is not a thought that is allowed. This university, unfortunately, is a good example of this sort of thinking. Directly after the October 7th massacre, the university put out a vague statement saying, quote, to our students affected by recent acts of violence in Israel and the Palestinian territories, we are here to support you. You know, just recent acts of violence. No one could tell what those acts of violence were, or who had perpetrated them, or what was going on from that statement. Just random acts of violence. Some things, as a famous congresswoman might say, happened to some people. Nothing about Hamas, nothing about the massacre, just violence of some sort anywhere, like might happen on a weekend in Chicago. Eventually, the university put out a longer statement decrying Hamas's terrorism. The chancellor then attempted to beg off commenting entirely, stating, quote, I am skeptical that those in roles like mine should frequently comment on global or world events, which is super weird because this university has routinely commented on, for example, George Floyd, or the unacceptability of racism against Black Americans, the Black Lives Matter movement. Murder of Jews, however, that's a different story. That's a little sensitive. And then a couple of weeks ago, protesters here gathered to shout a variety of garden variety Jew-hating slogans, ranging from glory to the martyrs presumably would be Hamas terrorists, to we will liberate the land by any means necessary, presumably including burning children in their cribs. This university then proceeded to say nothing. Presumably, the university would have had something to say had white supremacist protesters shouted about George Floyd. So why the double standard? Because to declare in favor of Western values over the values of the so-called oppressed would threaten the fundamental tenets of the left. And so Hamas fans must be given moral credibility. The university wouldn't want to come down too hard on the side of civilization. That might look discriminatory. Unfortunately, because of precisely this kind of cowardice, radical anti-Western ideals are now commonplace across this nation. The West has imported hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people into our various countries who hate the West and see it as uniquely evil. You can hear many of them calling for the genocide of Jews in the Middle East. You can see their signs calling for the victory of terrorist groups ranging from Hamas to the Palestinian Authority to Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is the most dangerous phenomenon in the West, the alliance of the radical, their fellow travelers, and the cowards. But the West does not have to surrender, and it will not. I believe that the West will once again stand up for its own principles. The West's freedoms are good. They are morally good, and they must be protected. That means opposing moral relativism. Loving freedom does not mean that every single expression is equivalently valuable. Freedoms should not be trampled upon, and those who oppose freedoms should be opposed. Yes, of course, we have freedom of religion in this country. And that means that even radical Muslim citizens in this country have full rights. But that does not mean that our politicians and our administrators should cater to them. It is not, quote unquote, Islamophobia to point out that defending Hamas is repulsive, or that a peculiarly small number of Muslims seem to be dissociating from Hamas or calling for their surrender. That is the reality. Reality is not Islamophobic. It is just reality. Yes, we have freedom of speech in this country, and that means that the coalition of the pseudo-oppressed, very wealthy Westerners who can stand outside with their iPhones and jabber about the evils of Israel can scream and shout outside. More power to them. They should enjoy, it's a little cold outside. I hope they enjoy themselves. It also means the rest of us can recognize that support for terrorist organizations puts you well outside the so-called Overton window. Nobody has the moral obligation to hire a Hamas supporter. Now, if you're not a citizen, different story. Our civilization has no duty to welcome you in or support you if you support Hamas. You should be deported forthwith to a place more in line with the values you apparently treasure. The West has a long history of resilience. The West should not and will not go down without a fight, but that requires actual moral courage. That requires recognizing the greatness of the West and not being shy about proclaiming that greatness in the face of alternatives. It requires moral clarity. It requires the tough business of saying things that are true. If the West does say things that are true, the West will emerge successful and stronger than before. If the West does not, it will fall to the darkness. Thanks so much. Happy to take all your questions.
I see we've already cut to the first commercial break there. Shapiro's videos tend to have a lot of them. So yeah, this is that's his opening salvo before he starts arguing with the students. I definitely have some thoughts, but what do you how about you?
I mean, well, first of all, I'm definitely still I'm recovering from the goosebumps created by that shredding guitar intro.
I thought you were going to say that you're still in recovery mode from all the high-level important ideas that you just heard.
That guitar intro, like, I'm lucky I didn't pass out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
No. I mean, look, I think that I think there's a lot you could say here, but one, and I want to get more into the details. I want to hear from you on some of that first. But I mean, like this sort of first thing that strikes me here is a little off-brand for Shapiro, but pretty revealing, is that very anti-free speech note at the end that he said, so he's talking about, he spends a lot of this talking about people who, support Hamas. And I'm pretty sure that when he says that, he doesn't actually mean support Hamas. He just means like criticize U.S. support for Israel, or, criticize, Israel killing tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza. Like particularly one of the things, he said at one point that Black Lives Matter immediately declared its support for Hamas, and man, citation needed. I want to see where Black Lives Matter, assuming he's talking about the actual nonprofit with that name, right? Like, got plenty of criticism, don't get me wrong, but I want to see where they said we support Hamas. Like, show me that, right? Like, sure, I am 99% sure what he means is just criticized Israel. Said that, the Palestinians' human rights are being egregiously violated. I'm pretty sure that's what he's calling supporting Hamas. So at the end, when he says no one has a moral obligation to hire a Hamas supporter, he's advocating blacklisting people based on criticism of Israel, and deport them too if they're not citizens, for sure. Yeah. But even American citizens, he wants to do McCarthyite blacklisting for criticizing Israel, which is like, okay, but like, I don't want you to ever pretend to be in favor of free speech again.
Yeah. It's like, obviously super vague what supporting Hamas means. People aren't going to like vote for Hamas.
Right.
Like they would have a right to do that if they wanted to. But yeah, he
Yeah,
also
are you funneling money to Hamas?
yeah.
Are you, like, do you advocate, like, that the place that you live, be run according to like Hamas's interpretation of Islamic law? Like that, this is all pretty good. Are you sending money to Hamas? Do you want the United States to send money to Hamas? Like it's all pretty fucking silly. But like the sort of grim thing at the end is it's like, no, he's talking about deporting people and blacklisting them from jobs for expressing the kind of political views that he says are outside the Overton window. But like we also know, once we understand that, support Hamas is just Ben Shapiro speak for oppose the genocide that's going on right now in Gaza, that, like the stuff he says is outside the Overton window is in fact like wildly popular views, right? Like I don't, don't get me wrong. I don't think that like the majority of the American public is like where I am on this, right? I'm under no illusions about that, right? In terms of sort of that kind of bigger picture kind of anti-Zionism, but I do think that like support for a permanent ceasefire, that's actually very popular. The belief that what's going on right now, rises to the level where you could use words like ethnic cleansing or genocide to describe it. That's very popular right now. There's like a poll that like where 50% of people who voted for Biden in 2020 say that, and another 30% say they're not sure. Right. So this is, and that's not 50% of all Americans. That's 50% of people who voted for Biden. But still, that's an awful lot of people who Ben Shapiro wants to just say no, their views shouldn't be tolerated. If they're not citizens, they should be deported. If they are, they should be blacklisted.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. You sound a little terroristy to me.
Yeah, fair enough.
That sounds pretty extreme. But also, yeah, just this idea that like if you are like a gay or trans person, you should like it follows that you should support a genocide in another country because the government there
Right.
homophobic is like
yeah, when you actually say it out loud in exactly the words that you just did, like it sounds completely ridiculous, right? Like
right.
It's like, oh well, all right, they were homophobic, so fair enough, right? Like they do what you want with them, like this is yeah.
The Republican Party wins here, like
yeah, right.
Be consistent about that,
Yeah. If the most, let's say the most extreme edge of the Republican Party like took political power in the United States, the people who are like the most like dead-eyed like moms for liberty psychos, who are apoplectic, that they think that like children are being groomed by exposure to books that of that where there's like a gay character or something. Like, okay, that's bad. I would still be opposed to displacing 85% of the American population from their homes and killing at least a couple percent of the population. That would still seem pretty bad to me.
Right. And you also have to recognize, if you believe like Hamas is that bad and has that much control, that like the citizens like can't do as much about it. But we're mostly killing them, so
yeah, right. Like there's the same people who will make a big deal about the lack of democracy under Hamas in Gaza will then turn around and be like, oh, well, why are you against killing them? Right? Their government's homophobic. This is just really wild stuff. And of course, it's also like, I remember Dave Smith, who we were watching a few weeks ago, had a good, I don't know. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember, interaction with him on Twitter where this was like the gist of it, right? That's like, look, whether you would want to live under Hamas is the most like sublimely irrelevant question here. It's like saying, it's like saying that your view on the invasion of Iraq in 2003 should depend on whether you would want Saddam Hussein to be president of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just a non sequitur. That's not on the table, right? Like that's not a possible outcome of any of this stuff, right? The question is just, are you going to, question is, are these crimes going to continue against the civilian population of Gaza? And like, it's not like there's any outcome of this. Like, it's not like, if you have, even if you don't think what I do, right, which is that the end game in Gaza is to, make normal life so impossible that, you can convince people to accept, voluntary transfer to other places, right? Even if you pretend that Israeli actions right now are consistent with the goal of Palestinian life continuing as normal when it's all over in Gaza, it's not like the Israelis are gonna spread like secularism and gay rights to Gaza, or have ever pretended that that's part of their goal, right? Like these subjects just have nothing to do with each other.
Totally. Yeah, which is I think pretty obvious in this case, because Ben Shapiro is extremely concerned about like cancel culture and everything, unless it involves like, genociding a population because their government is homophobic. All of a sudden now he's so woke about LGBTQ issues.
Yeah.
Like
and all in favor of canceling Americans who have the wrong opinions. Yeah. No, absolutely. So another thing I wanted to so there are two other things I wanted to say. So there's the less important one that I caught in that opening statement, is when he was begging on the university administration at Wisconsin for making a statement that vaguely alluded to recent acts of violence without saying which one. And he thinks that's horrible moral cowardice if you're talking about 695 Israeli civilians being killed on October 7th. But obvious follow-up question, would he want the University of Wisconsin administration to go into great detail about the tens of thousands of Palestinians who've been killed by Israel since then, or the millions that have been displaced from their homes, the hundreds of thousands that are starving, right? Like, does he want them to like specifically call out that stuff, or would that be yet more evidence of left-wing bias if they did so?
Yeah, I think he would probably consider it anti-Semitic,
Yeah, no, I think he almost certainly would say that. And yeah, and then like the last thing I had, and like this is actually, the most important, is that he said that, people in the West are desperate to hype up what he called the errors committed by Israel in Gaza in order to, so that was the word choice, errors, in order, and I wrote this down, to establish a retroactive moral equivalence between Israel and its genocidal neighbors. So, two points on that, right? One is that the neighbors thing is actually really seriously crazy, like referring to Gaza as like Israel's neighbor, as if this had been like an independent state, before October 7th, right? Like, that's like, no, this is territory that was, in that Smith formulation, right? The prison yard was abandoned to the prison gang, but like but certainly air, land, and sea borders, what food was allowed to get in, what, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how close people were even allowed to get to the fence, the perimeter of the whole thing was all lethally controlled by Israel the entire time from the so-called disengagement in 2006 up till October 7th. There was never a time when any of that wasn't true. So I mean, just like neighbor, it's like, come on, you don't think even Ben Shapiro doesn't actually think that Gaza was an independent country, right? Like at any point in this time. So I mean, that's really worth pointing out. And yes, also just the idea that 695 civilians can, being killed can make Hamas genocidal, whereas the IDF killing well north of 30,000, possibly dramatically north of that. I mean, if you go with Ralph Nader's point about the, like the argument he made about how the numbers are being lowballed, but, certainly I think everybody acknowledges, right? Well north of 30,000 people. It's like, 695 is genocidal, 30,000 is an error, right? Or like, hundreds of thousands of people starving, right? Like going like days where, they get maybe, 1 meal a day, maybe not, often none days in a row where children are dying of starvation while aid isn't being allowed in, so that you get these like total absurdities, like the U.S. like airdropping token amounts of aid as if into enemy territory, and talking about spending 60 days building this pier to let it in there because Netanyahu won't just let it in the trucks. That's an error. They 1.9 million people being displaced from their homes is an error. I mean, that's just like an accident. The IDF tripped and accidentally kicked 1.9 million people out of their homes. I just, I think short of something with nuclear weapons, I think it'd be really, really
failure.
What's that?
Intelligence failure.
Intelligence failure. Yeah. Yeah, short of a nuclear mishap, I don't think there's any way to kick 1.9 million people out of their homes by accident.
Yeah.
And like, of course, there's like 12 pages of the South African file into the ICJ that's just like an assemblage of, quotes from high-ranking Israelis expressing genocidal intent. It's not even just inferring intent from actions, although I think that's the most important thing. It's the it's also inferring intent from words, right? So it's like, this really just feels like an article of religious faith to me, that like in the Ben Shapiro worldview, like bad, scary Muslims do crimes. The worst thing that it's possible to imagine the United States or Israel doing is an error.
Yeah, definitely. I was also curious about what you think of him invoking Jean-Paul Sartre and I guess Foucault and Fanon. Yeah.
Oh, I actually missed the Foucault part. What did he say about
Well,
Foucault?
he refers to moral relativism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the Sartre thing, we could start with that. What's your take on that?
What my take on that? I don't trust Shapiro, so I'm not saying that Sartre couldn't have like said something bad about this, but I'm just going to suspend judgment on that one until somebody can give me the full quote in the original context, because Shapiro just doesn't have a lot of credibility for me as a source there. But Fanon, I actually do think, we actually talked about this when I was in This is Revolution earlier this week. I actually do think that there are some pretty big differences between Fanon's worldview and the kind of, Marxist analysis and the kind of, moral universalism that I'd certainly subscribe to. But the part of all that that's most interesting to me is actually the part you just reminded me of, the moral relativism, because I think that people like Shapiro, use that term in like exactly the opposite sense of what it actually means. Like,
Yeah.
like a moral relativist is somebody who refuses to apply the same standards to different, you know, countries, different societies, different situations, right? Says, oh, well, that would be wrong over here, but it's not wrong over here, right? That's moral relativism, where you say like, you know, the same way we're all relativists about politeness, that we say, oh, well, that's not a rude gesture in that culture, right? You know, this is that like, you know, but it is in this culture, right? So it's rude to do that here, but it's not rude to do that there. The moral relativist would say, well, that's wrong for us, it's not wrong for them, and they'd sort of deny that there's like some kind of overall sense of right or wrong we could appeal to. But whenever the Ben Shapiros of the world accuse people of moral relativism, what they actually mean is the opposite of relativism. What they actually mean is what they're referring to as moral relativism is equating bad things done by other people, by, you know, the bad people, by the enemies, with bad things that are done by, you know, the United States or Israel. So I think what they really mean by relativism is precisely applying the same standards across the board, right? I mean, that's what they're actually getting at when they, you know, they throw around the relativism accusations, like, oh, how dare you equate what we do with what the bad people do? It's like, well, equating what we do with what the bad people do isn't relativism. It's universalism. It's saying, here are my standards, and I'm just going to apply them consistently everywhere.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
There's a great evil.
Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
Oh, no, I didn't have anything to add to that. I just was wondering what your take was on that. Yeah.
Fair enough.
In the world going on all the time, and that is the evil of abortion. But little things can make a big difference. When you use the keyword baby, that's pound 250 baby, or go to preborn.
Obviously skipping the commercial, but I almost wish I didn't at this point, because that seems like an amazing commercial.
We'll have more opportunities. Commercials, yeah.
Fair enough.
Mr. Shapiro will be happy to take your questions now. If you have a question, please use the aisle closest to you to file to the back of the room where my colleague is. When you are ready for your question, you can come down the aisle, but only when it's your turn. You'll stand on this mark, and I will hold the microphone for you.
And as always, if you disagree, you go to the front of the line.
I don't think I should be at the front of the line. Sorry. What would you say to young Americans who are afraid of negative social and academic repercussions if they speak out of what they believe to be true?
So I think that there is a new, more muscular business community that is beginning to actually awaken from its stupor. So the business community has been taken over by a lot of people in the recent past who are deeply afraid of diversity lawsuits. They're deeply afraid of legal liability. They're afraid of HR issues. I think you're starting to see a lot of businesses emerge and awaken from that. And I think a lot of businesses are perfectly willing to hire people who are reasonable. And I think that that's going to continue in the near future. That's my great hope. I think the business community is starting to turn. They've had enough of this stuff. It turns out that when the money is free and easy, it's very easy to spend millions of dollars on DEI seminars that teach you to hate white people or whatever. But it turns out that when the money gets tight, then people don't want to do that as much. And they'd rather just hire, you know, a productive employee who might believe that the American flag is decent.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The whiplash here is fucking amazing. Like, I mean, I know we talked for a while in between, but like 3 minutes ago in the video, he was advocating, I think, mass deportation of anybody he disagreed with about Palestine who didn't have their citizenship yet. And certainly he was advocating like blacklisting American citizens he disagreed with about Palestine. And now it's like 2 minutes later and the framing is different. And, you know, he's right back to posturing as a free speech champion.
Yeah. Yeah, crazy. Except the end about the thing with someone who might love the American flag. Or might think the American flag is a good thing or something.
that honestly, that sounds like dialogue from like a Simpsons or Family Guy episode where they're making fun of politicians like who are pandering to people. And like that's like the line that they would give them. I'm sorry, I know everybody's gonna be mad when I say this, but I actually think the American flag is pretty damn great. I don't care how much, like how much everybody's gonna hate me for that.
Yeah, you got to support the team.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that anybody was worried that if they let it be known that they liked the American flag, they wouldn't get hired.
Right?
Really a dispatch from an alternate dimension.
Exactly. Yeah, that's I've also I've seen Occupy protesters arrested carrying American flags, all kinds of people like the flag, whatever.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I grew up in schools where there were lots of American flags.
Well, you probably went to super woke schools, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, regular ass public schools, and I'm in Michigan. I feel like there were a lot of American flags around. That's
regular schools are all woke.
Yeah, I guess so. All right.
Yep.
Hey Ben, this week in Israel, they reported that 76% of Israelis thought that Netanyahu should step down. And I'm curious, because Israel doesn't have a figurehead like Zelensky to rally around, is Netanyahu doing more harm than good? Also, I'm curious if you would have on Dean Phillips for a Sunday special.
So I'm not really aware of Dean Phillips other than he's running against Biden, right? That's the guy. I didn't hear of him until he ran against Biden. So sure, I guess, why not? I mean, sure, yeah. Okay. But in any case, as far as Netanyahu, the reason that Israelis are very anti-Netanyahu is that Israelis actually are reacting the way that I would hope that Americans reacted to bad presidents, which is when a president fails, they get very angry at it. So this is the single greatest security failure in Israeli history. And so even a lot of people who voted for Netanyahu in Israel are now very anti-Netanyahu. Now, the way that it works in Israel is because they have a coalition government, they actually have to have a vote of no confidence, and then a majority has to vote Netanyahu out. That's not going to happen right now. But whenever people on the left or in the media start talking about the right-wing Netanyahu government, that's ridiculous and ignorant, considering that right now they have a unity government that includes Benny Gantz, who's on the center left. Right? The fact is that Israel has come together in incredible ways in the after. It reminds me of 9/11 in the United States. People came together for a hot second here. I think it's going to last a lot longer there, because the truth is that as devastating as 9/11 was for the United States, Israel's a much, much smaller country. And so in terms of sort of the feeling of insecurity, they're also surrounded on every border by people who don't like them very much. And so I think that the future of the state of Israel is going to be a lot more unified. But yeah, I mean, Netanyahu is going to take a serious political hit at some point in the future.
Internationally?
I mean, internationally, I think people are looking for an excuse to be putting pressure on Israel, because the easiest solution is always weapons down, everybody calm down, a few Jews got killed, but whatever, we don't want this thing to escalate. The reality is what is in the best interest of pretty much everybody, except for the Iranians, is for Hamas to be destroyed completely and utterly. That's in the best interest of the Europeans. It's in everybody's best interest, including, by the way, Sunni governments.
Hello, Ben. My name is Tyler.
I don't know that we need to spend a long time on this, but that description of Israeli politics is crazy on multiple levels.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the Israeli government has shifted super far to the right, and they're frequently popular candidates who rival Netanyahu to his right. And,
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is the most right-wing government literally in Israel's history. They have their people who are in the coalition. Netanyahu obviously is a very right-wing guy. He is, to put it at the most mild, right? He was a diehard opponent of the peace process in the 90s. He's repeatedly taken credit for having done more than anybody else, he says, to make sure there'd be no Palestinian state. And there are a lot of people in his coalition government who are way to the right of Netanyahu himself, right? Like he's really, he's really allied himself with the most insane fascist-like people in Israeli politics in order to hold together a government. Which, by the way, when Ben attributes all of the unpopularity of Netanyahu to the security failure, don't get me wrong, I mean, it's definitely part of it, right? Like, that's definitely true. But like, also, if you were paying any attention to Israeli politics before October 7th, there were like months of like this unprecedented wave of mass protests against the Netanyahu government. There were general strikes. A lot of that, the sort of main thing, again, before October 7th, before that security failure, was the so-called judicial reform plan that would have taken away most of the power of the Israeli High Court, which, they're like the sort of objective reason that was scary was that what tiny few protections remain for human rights for Palestinians in the West Bank would have been totally gone if that had happened, because like once out of every 9 or 10 times the court rules against like stuff that the Israeli government wants to do there. And I think in particular, if you look at Netanyahu and his coalition, the long-term agenda there is like outright annexation of a lot of that territory. But also there were, most of the people, were who were protesting were like well within the Zionist mainstream of Israeli politics. It was more just like, oh, this guy is incredibly corrupt and he has all these criminal charges against him, and now he wants to get rid of the Supreme Court. I wonder why, right? I mean, like this is, the sort of politics of that were a lot like if, like, I don't know, Donald Trump wins again and he were trying to do some crazy overhaul of the legal system that seemed like it would benefit him, right? Mm-hmm. So like, it's also, none of this really has anything to do with the larger subject, but it's also just like, it is also just remarkable that you do not have to know that much about internal Israeli politics to know that his description here is just totally nonsensical.
Yeah, absolutely. He also says that the world is just always looking for a reason, I think or always looking for an excuse to put pressure on Israel. And that's his explanation for like why there's so much outcry over what's going on around the world. Over like what Israel's doing, which is like something we hear a lot in these debates, which is I just think that like it's not great when you get to a place where that's your argument, is like everybody else is the asshole. Like and they all like have it out for me.
Right. It's just like every single human rights organization in the world, no matter how otherwise respected, just happens to have this horrible anti-Israel bias. And all that
country at the UN.
It's like if you just on an interpersonal level, if you find yourself like saying of every single person in your life who's expressed an opinion of you, well, they're just kind of an asshole anyway, right? Like there eventually comes a time to reflect on whether it is perhaps you who are the asshole in all of this. But yeah, it's also just wild to say that people, is it what do you say? The world's attitude is, well, okay, some Jews died, but you can't do much response. Like, it's been done, and response has already literally displaced millions of people from their homes. I think that was already true by the time this event happened. Certainly if it wasn't, it was well on its way to being true already. It's, right now, by the numbers, Gaza is literally the place on the entire planet right now where it's most dangerous to be a child. That the number of, like way more children died in Gaza even before the starvation really got going, than had died in all the war zones in the world put together in the previous year, right? That you're sort of,
now it's at the previous 4 years.
Yeah. So it's like you're so we can't do anything in response. Like, well, she's okay. This is like, that's, stop at that point is not exactly doing nothing. And then the thing about Benny Gantz, I just don't even know what to say. I mean, it's like, maybe there's some sense in which he's not just completely phoning in from an alternate universe on that one. But like, if so, I don't think it's going to be a very relevant sense. In other words, I think when non-Israelis talk about like more or less right-wing Israeli governments, they're not primarily thinking about like, I don't know, whether they're cuts to social welfare programs and, like in Israel or whatever, right? Like what they're primarily thinking of is the treatment of the Palestinians. And on that, the idea that Benny Gantz of all people is some kind of, left winger is just really wild, right? Like this is, no, no, he's not, right? I don't think you're going to find a lot of Palestinians who would describe him that way.
I figure, I could be wrong. I thought there might be more agreement across like the left and right in Israel about Gaza than other issues.
No, I think that is right. What I'm saying is like, I think that like, when Shapiro says, oh, people say, the Netanyahu government is so right wing, but it includes Benny Gantz, who's center left. It's like, any sense in which Gantz might be center left. And, I don't know a lot about his, views on other issues, but it's like any sense in which Gantz might be center left on some other issue is completely irrelevant to what people are talking about when they say the Netanyahu government is the most right-wing government in Israel's history. What they're talking about is the treatment of the Palestinians.
Yeah, totally.
It's an honor to get to speak to you tonight. My question's over right-wing populism within the future of the Conservative Party. Over the last decade, through the rise of figures like Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Josh Hawley, we have seen a rise in right-wing populism, especially with young people, challenging the traditional conservatism of the Republican Party. What do you think will be the outcome of this internal identity struggle for the party as a whole?
So the weird thing that's so strange about, for example, the triumvirate of people you just mentioned, Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Josh Hawley, is there are actually pretty significant disagreements between them on policy. Foreign policy would be a good example. Trump, for example, was extremely pro-Israel. Marjorie Taylor Greene is kind of somewhere there, and Hawley is pro-Israel, but also tends to be more isolationist generally than Trump was on foreign policy. When it comes to spending habits, Hawley is less big government than Trump is. What populism is a tactic. It's not an actual philosophy. Populism is just a tactic where you basically say the people are the final repository of all wisdom, and so I'm going to you, the people, as opposed to the elites. And you can see populism used by, for example, Bernie Sanders, right? This is Sanders' shtick also. It's just from the left. And so I'm not sure what to make of populism as a political movement in terms of its actual policy recommendations, because you do see a wide variety of figures who have tried to kind of engage with that populist wave. I think the Republicans who dismiss it, who pretend that they don't have to speak to it, are going to do very poorly. At the same time, I don't think that Trumpism is a philosophy. Trumpism is an impulse. And I think the impulse is sometimes good, but it's reactive. It's reactionary in nature. And so that's why, for example, you'll see in the Republican Party that the more somebody is criticized, the more Republicans start to resonate to that person, whether or not they're dumb. Right? This happens a lot. Like you'll have Lauren Boebert, and Lauren Boebert, I hate to break it to you guys, Lauren Boebert ain't like the brightest egg in the carton. And I mean, just Google Lauren Boebert Beetlejuice concert. And in any case, Lauren Boebert, like there's a mass support for her that came out from kind of the hard right once she was attacked by the left. And it seems to me that we shouldn't measure the greatness or goodness of our politicians by how much the left hates them. That can be an early indicator that maybe they might be worth looking at, but that shouldn't be sort of the final judgment call. They really, really hate this guy, therefore he is good. It seems to me that they really, really hate that guy, therefore they hate that guy is more accurate.
Thank you very much.
I don't know. There's probably not a lot to say here, although it is kind of funny that when he was starting to explain why he thought that there were important policy differences between Trump, Hawley, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, he started out saying, well, Trump's super pro-Israel, and then he kind of realized mid-sentence that the other two were also.
Yeah, except that Marjorie Taylor Greene is like pro-Israel, but like actually kind of anti-Semitic. Like she supports Israel, but
Yeah.
he doesn't have a problem with like the Jewish space laser stuff, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think historically that's not an uncommon combination. You know, I mean, you go all the way back to Lord Balfour of Balfour Declaration fame, and you know, I don't know a ton about him, but from what I've seen, like I think he actually was pretty anti-Semitic, which is like not really even inconsistent, because it's like, well, okay, you don't really want there to be more Jews in Britain, so you know, like you're in favor of sending them somewhere else, right? You know, and I think there is a lot of that historically.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a statement I remember reading years ago. I might be getting this slightly wrong about the last about you know, Tsar Nicholas, you know, the one who's overthrown in the Russian Revolution. That's, you know, sort of saying that his ultimate hope was that like maybe a third of the Jews in Russia would assimilate, and you know, and a third of them would maybe just die in pogroms, and a third of them would migrate to Palestine. You know, that's I'm not saying Marjorie Taylor Greene is that, right? But like, I think that the fact that she dabbles in a little bit of loony anti-Semitic conspiracy theorizing and is also all in favor of Israel, I think she's part of it. She's part of a tradition there.
She might not even know that there's like a lot of Jewish people there. Nobody told her.
You know, I wouldn't want to hazard a guess about what that woman does and doesn't know about the world around her. I feel like you're never going to get in trouble, you know, setting the expectations real low there.
Yeah.
Hello, Ben. There was a time where the word mother exclusively described a woman in relation to her biological offspring, but our definition has since shifted to account for adoption, leaving us with a more social and less biological outlook on motherhood. My question for you is how affirming transgender identity is such a threat to biology when we have clear precedent for similar shifts in language?
Okay, so usually there is a distinction. You can call somebody mother, but then an adopted mother is not going to be insulted when you say biological mother. Right? An adopted mother is not going to say the biological mother is an inappropriate term. The trans movement claims that the term biological female is somehow offensive. The trans movement will claim that female encompasses not biology somehow. It's a bizarrely illogical categorization. So the trans movement is not a threat to biology. Biology is biology. People will continue to reproduce. I mean, some of us. But in any case, the no implication made. But in any case, some people will continue to reproduce. Those reproductive relationships will be almost entirely male-female. The only exceptions would be in vitro or artificial insemination, which will be an extraordinarily tiny percentage of actual inseminations and pregnancies. So biology is not threatened. Truth is threatened. I'm not worried about biology being threatened. If you want to threaten your own biology, I mean, that's your prerogative. But truth, the idea that male refers to a biological category as opposed to an idea that you have in your head that is unverifiable by any sort of objective reality, that is something that nobody who cares about truth should acquiesce to. The entire way that we communicate is through words that have mutually agreed upon definitions. And the definition of a word cannot be an Ouroboros that eats itself. It can't be a woman is anyone who says they are a woman, which is a woman. It's completely circular. That has no definition. If you want to define a category, the category has to have definition. And any attempt to broaden that category out to include things that are clearly not in that category, and in fact, there are only two categories, male and female. They're actually in the other category. That is a fundamental assault on the truth, and nobody should accept that.
In one of your more infamous debates, you said, "I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are."
Yes.
My argument is not that terms like biological female or biological male are necessarily offensive. My argument is that you are saying that referring to a trans woman as a woman or a trans man as a man or et cetera, is like inherently offensive or threatens biology. And I'm curious why it's so threatened when there's clear precedent for changing the language.
Again,
or
the term mother does not include father. Every category has to have boundaries. The boundary of female starts at male. And when you start including male in the category of female, you are threatening biological definitions as well as basic truth.
Well, you could say the category of mother starts at conception, or a biological relation to an offspring. But as we know,
but again, the idea that you are, but the idea of motherhood being the act of mothering, right? And that is a female. A female does the act of mothering. You can say that a female who does the act of mothering is a mother, but you also have a special category called biological motherhood. I'm not going to say that an adoptive mom and a biological mom have precisely the same definition. They don't. They're underneath a subset of category called motherhood. That motherhood sometimes involves birth, sometimes it does not, but it certainly involves being a female.
What do you think about the distinction between cis women and trans women?
Explain.
Well, you're saying that a more inclusive usage of the word mother isn't particularly offensive because we also have biological mother.
Yes.
We've offered the term cis woman and even biological woman or assigned female at birth. We've offered a variety of terms that properly categorize people.
Again, you cannot extend the term woman to apply to a biological male. Every category has an endpoint. If there are only two categories, male and female, and you say that female now is in this category, there are no definitions. There are no definitions. I mean, to paraphrase my friend Matt Walsh, I'm going to need you to explain what a woman is without reference to the word woman. We can go on all day like this, but
yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily circular to say that a woman is someone who exhibits womanhood.
Yes, it is.
And that
is definitionally circular.
Well,
that's like saying a hand is something that fundamentally shows handhood.
Wait a second. 45 seconds ago, wasn't his definition of mother somebody who does mothering?
Yeah. Yeah, and also he started out by saying that like you can't put certain things in, you can't put different things in different categories. But then he was like, well, when it comes to like adopted mothers, like it's not precisely the same. Like I understand there's like a subcategory.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just seems like, I know we're not quite done with this exchange yet, but I've got to say it is really funny that like when he said explain, and then this, very conservative crowd, like does this sort of like round of warm laughter. Look, that tells me that these people are just responding to tone and confidence and vibes. They're not responding to the argument, because if you're actually paying attention to the argument, sorry, Shapiro is being destroyed right now. Right? What's that?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, because everything, because he has been completely unsuccessful in answering the original challenge. And this is a very good challenge. I don't know if she read my book or not, but but Give Them an Argument, the book in 2019, like explores this exact analogy, right? It's obviously not original to me, but like, I talk about this in that book specifically with reference to Shapiro, right? And things that he said about this. And so her challenge to him was, all right, you're going to say that biology is somehow, that like we're rejecting the truth about biology if we use the word woman to describe a trans woman. But hold on, how is that different from saying the thing that you presumably wouldn't say, because it would be obviously insane to say, which is that like we're insulting biology, or we're not, we're rejecting the truth if we apply the word mother to an adoptive mother, right? Why is that? Why is the structure of one in any way, shape, or form different from the structure of the other? And nothing he said has touched that. Right? Like he talks quickly. He sounds very confident. He exudes confidence, which, she doesn't, because she's a college undergraduate who's, this may very well be the first time she's ever like asked a question at like a public event with lots of people in it. But no, he's, she's just 100% right about this, that the argument that he's making against referring to trans women as women could just as easily be made against referring to adoptive mothers as mother. I mean, he just has not pointed out yet a single disanalogy between those cases. When he says, and when he says, oh, some trans activists, he says the trans movement as if they all held a big vote about it and decided that this was their position, right? But it's like, yeah, said some trans activists dislike the term biological female. Okay, fine. Let's just take it as read that they're wrong to dislike that. But that's not the question. The question is your position, which is that we should never apply the word woman to a trans woman. We should never use female pronouns to describe trans women, right? That because of biology, right? Is that position consistent with your willingness to refer to adoptive mothers as mothers? Because clearly that's a case where we have a term where, yeah, there's a biological definition. There's also a social definition that everybody understands. In most cases, they overlap. Sometimes they don't, right? Like where mothers, you have adoptive mothers, or you have mothers, who gave their babies up for adoption or whatever, right? But he hasn't pointed out to a single. He has yet to point to a single relevant difference between those cases. He said that that people that there's he said that it's very hard to come up with a definition, which man, Ben, I've got bad news for you about conceptual analysis in general, right? So conceptual analysis is the thing that philosophers will often try to do, where they try to come up with a definition for some important concept in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. This is like when Socrates is going around Athens asking people to, define, justice, or, tell them what is the good or whatever. Notoriously very difficult to do, right? That's why he was so annoying that they killed him. Wittgenstein in the 20th century says that, he has this famous discussion of like trying to give a conceptual analysis of a game, right? What exactly is the definition of game? We all feel like we know what a game is, right? But like, what are the actual necessary and sufficient conditions that, football has in common with chess, has in common with tag, that are going to like explain what it is that makes these things games. And Wittgenstein famously just gives up on it, right? He says it's impossible, that all you can say about the concept is that it's a family resemblance. And there just is no definition we can give in necessary and sufficient conditions. Other people since then have disagreed and like offered suggested definitions, and people argue about whether those definitions work. But like, Wittgenstein's a very smart guy, right? Couldn't do it. Even like words like table and chair, when you start to like really try to give precise definitions of those things in terms of necessary and sufficient condition, it gets very difficult very quickly. There's a famous Twitter exchange. I do not remember who this was, but it's some Twitter person who's obsessed with trans people, was like, oh, define woman. And, somebody said, well, define chair. And he's like, oh, a thing that, he gave like 2 or 3 conditions. And it's like, you sit on it and it kicks it lower to the ground, you sit and all this stuff. And then somebody like gives him a picture of a horse and said, okay, so this counts as a chair on the definition that you just gave, right? Like all of which is just to say people having a hard time, and it being hard to give a precise definition of something is not really the knockdown argument that there's no coherent concept that he thinks it is. But also, putting that aside, he didn't give a precise definition of woman, of mother, right? No. Like, so in terms of the challenge the student originally raised for him, what is the difference between accepting both biological and non-biological meanings of mother and accepting both biological and non-biological meanings of woman? He just hasn't risen to the challenge yet. He hasn't given a single distinction between
one of his first answers to that was quote, adopted mothers won't be offended if you call them biological mothers. That was one of his answer.
Yeah, I think what he was saying is that adoptive mothers won't be offended by being told that they're not biological mothers. And it's like, yeah, okay, fair enough. They wouldn't. But also,
Maybe
imagine,
they haven't
yeah.
like gotten together and spoken on this.
Fair point. Fair
There was
point.
one meeting.
But even if it's true, it's like, yeah, okay. But also, like, take 10 seconds to try to imagine a world where whether adoptive parenthood was legitimate was like a hot topic of the culture war. And like where you had like right-wing school principals who refused to allow adoptive parents to go to parent-teacher conferences because words have meaning, damn it, and and I'm not going to deny biology by allowing an adoptive parent to go to a parent-teacher conference. These conferences are only for biological parents. I'll bet after the first 10,000 times adoptive parents had heard that, they would start to get a little prickly about the phrase biological parent too, because they were so used to hearing people invoke that in the course of trying to deny their rights. And certainly, yeah, like, yeah, sure, even accepting for the sake of argument that like most adoptive parents, I mean, for the most part, kind of depends. If you never told your kid they were adopted, you probably are going to be pretty upset if somebody says that, right? But like, but yeah, even if he's right that most adoptive parents wouldn't be bothered by the phrase, biological parent, or by being told that they're not biological parents. You know what would 100% for sure bother them? Telling them that they're not parents, right? Which would be the exact equivalent of saying trans women are not women, full stop. Right? Like the exact equivalent would be telling an adoptive parent that they're not a parent. And of course that would bother them. So that's not a disanalogy. And
or that the kid is not a kid for that, like, for that matter, like,
yeah, that's not your kid, right?
Parents
like,
at school board meetings, like, I'm not having my kid sharing a bathroom with some kid who's adopted,
Yeah. And then the other one is that the only other attempt I think he's made that we haven't talked about is that when he said, oh, well, for any concept, there always has to be a border to that concept. And again, he just sounds so fucking confident, right? That it's easy for people who basically like him to nod along at all this without thinking about it. But it's like, for every concept, there has to be a border of that concept. And the border of the female is male. And, by the way, when he says male and female are the only two categories, even if we are strictly talking about the biological stuff here, not gender identity, clearly not true, right? There are people with intersex conditions, but whatever, forget that, right? Maybe I guess he would say that's not a different category. That's like an overlap of the categories or whatever. But like, clearly it's not true that the only thing other than people who are clearly female is people who are clearly male. But also, when he says this, like he makes this move, it's like, oh, well, every category has to exclude something for there to be a border, or else there's no definition there, right? If it means something, there has to be things that its meaning excludes, and therefore, if any definition of woman has to exclude males, okay, hold up. Why couldn't you make precisely the same move for motherhood? That every definition has to exclude something. Right. So mother has to exclude not only non-women, right, but like women who didn't give birth.
Yeah.
Like what would be the disanalogy between those two arguments? It's just completely incoherent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what I
A
have to
tree
say,
is something that demonstrates the qualities of treehood. What new actual definitional content have you added to the word?
I can define womanhood for you, which is a set of characteristics associated with females, and a woman as someone who exhibits said womanhood.
Okay, well, you have just used the word female and woman to define each other. So you say a woman is a female, but not a biological female. A female is a woman, and a woman is a female.
This is so uncharitable. Obviously, she does mean biological female. Right? Like what she's saying is that she's actually giving a pretty credible definition. I mean, she's on the spot at a Q&A. She's not like writing a philosophy paper, but but I think that her point is that, look, clearly there's this set of characteristics that we associate with biological females. And so the same way that like there's a relationship that we associate with biological mothers and their children. And you're saying that, a woman who's in that relationship with her children as a mother, even if she's not actually a biological mother, similarly, that there's a set of characteristics, mental, behavioral, whatever, that we associate with biological females, that like we could say in the social sense you're a woman if you exhibit those characteristics, even if you're not a biological woman. That's clearly what she's saying, right? So it's like whether you accept that or not, I'm sure we could have like a fascinating like graduate seminar where we spend 2 hours arguing about whether that's a good definition or not. But it's not just trivially circular the way he's trying to suggest.
Mm-hmm.
But at no point have you added
I
any
didn't
new
say,
content.
No, I said a woman is someone who exhibits womanhood, and womanhood is a set of characteristics.
Yes, and that doesn't mean anything.
How does it not
The
mean
reason it doesn't
anything?
mean, okay, again, a dog is a thing that exhibits the characteristics of doghood. It's a set of characteristics characterized by being a dog. I've added no content to that. If you have no idea what a dog is, you still have no idea what a dog is.
There are plenty of labels that refer to concepts. This is not a new thing.
It's not a label referring to a concept. It's a label that's referring to the same word as the concept. You can't do that.
I'm
It's
not
fundamentally
referring to
circular.
the same word. I'm saying that womanhood.
You have not defined even womanhood. You said a set of characteristics that applies to females, and then you're applying it to males. So clearly, this is nonsensical. I'm sorry that it doesn't. I'm sorry that your attempts to worm a definition into nonsense are not succeeding. But like, I can't make that fit into logic because it doesn't. I mean, I'm sorry.
Hi there. All right.
Howdy.
So
All right. I don't do a lot of speaking as a sentences, but like, come on, man. I speaking here as somebody who knows much, much, much more about logic than Ben Shapiro does. What he just said didn't mean anything, right? And like, I don't just mean like what I say makes more sense than what he does or something like that. Using but no, it like my doctoral, like I have a PhD. My doctoral dissertation was about the philosophy of logic. I have a book from an academic press that's about logic. I've taught like formal and informal logic classes many times at many universities. I know way more about that than he does, and the idea that he can't fit it into logic is just kind of nonsense. I think that like even if you what does logic have to do with this, right? Like, is he saying that it's inconsistent? If so, how? He hasn't told us, right? Is he just saying that, sounds like what he's saying is that again, the reason to do that little appeal to expertise thing that I would normally not do is just like to explain why I'm so confident that he's just spouting nonsense when he says that like logic is the thing he can't fit it into, right? Like this is, if there are any number of subjects that he could have invoked, they'd be like, oh, I don't know, maybe he knows something I don't, right? But like, no, that's not one of them. I'm sorry, it's not, right? Like this is, what does logic have to do with this? Like what you're saying is that you don't think it's an informative definition. Okay. But one, I think it's a ludicrously uncharitable straw man interpretation of the definition, right? Because I mean, even if she wasn't confident enough or quick enough on her feet to say, oh, I meant biological female, that does seem like the obvious interpretation of what she was saying, that, womanhood is defined by a set of characteristics that are typically associated with biological females. Two, notice he hasn't given a definition either. Ask him to define biological female, right?
Yeah.
Like he hasn't done that, right? Like if you mean like, I think what most people mean, which is about, different biological characteristics, it's like a certain cluster of characteristics. Like most people don't have precise definitions. Some people will say, oh, well, there is this exact binary definition, which is large and small gametes. But I don't think that's what most people really mean. And I think that, before people even knew about that part of science, I think they were making this distinction. But also like, look, even if there's not a precise definition, right? Lots of concepts don't have precise definitions. As I said, it's very, very difficult to pin down precise definitions, and that's just not a good enough reason to think that it's a meaningless concept, or you can't fit it into logic. That's just, it's just the level of, like, in some ways, even though, like, I actually think this is very far from the worst thing that you said in this video. Like, I think if you, like, insist on, referring to somebody as something that doesn't, line up with, with the labels they identify with, I think that's very asshole-ish. But, like, I don't think it's as bad as defending genocide, right? Like, so it's, like, very far from the morally worst thing you said. But I think this, like, it might actually annoy me the most out of everything he's said so far, just because, like, he's so smug about it, but he just does not have an argument to back it up.
Yeah, and I do think that, like, talking this fast does a lot of work for him,
Totally. And just the confidence, the tone, right? It's like he sounds so sure that, like, I think it makes most people question whether they're missing something.
And they probably are, because I think if you do, like, really like, pay attention as much as you can to what he's saying, one thing you'll notice quickly is, like, how much you're missing because he's talking too fast, like, or how certain things don't seem to mean much. There are a lot of nebulous phrases.
Totally. So Skelwum from the chat says, wouldn't the Sorites paradox refute the concepts have to have clear boundaries? Yeah. Right. So the classic Sorites thing is, like, how many rocks do you have to have together for it to count as a heap of rocks?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't know, right? Like, it's like, I know, I can kind of, I know what doesn't seem like a heap, right? If there are, like, 2 rocks together on the ground, I know that if there are, like, 20 rocks altogether, that I would call that heap. I don't know where the boundary line is, or, like, the sort of classic thing I always do if I'm unpacking this, like, giving a talk or something, is I'll just, like, pick somebody who's completely bald in the audience and be like, all right, start with that guy's head of hair, add 1 hair to it. Is he still bald? Everybody's like, yeah, he's still bald, right? All right, add another hair. Is he still bald? And, it's like, look, how many hairs have to be on your head for you to count as not bald? Well, how about if somebody said you have to have exactly 40,537 hairs to count as not being bald? That seems insane, and not really, because you picked the wrong number, right? Like, it's just like the idea that if you had 40,536, you wouldn't be bald, but you would be bald. But if you had 40,537, you wouldn't be. Seems obviously wrong. So that leads to the thought, okay, well, maybe 1 hair more or less can't make a difference, but that can't be right either, because apply the principle that 1 hair can't make a difference a million times in a row, and now you're saying that somebody who has, like, a very full head of hair counts as bald, right? So that's what the puzzle is, the paradox, right? It seems like, there has to be a strict cutoff, but it doesn't seem like there can be a strict cutoff. But whatever you make of that, right? One thing that pretty much everybody who's thought about it agrees on is that what we can't do is say that just because it's a little vague or unclear where the boundary of something is, that means that the concept just doesn't mean anything, right? That there is no distinction between bald and not bald, right? Like, so yeah, the idea, I think that's totally right. I think that's a good point. Oh, okay, never mind. Sorry, I fucked up. Somebody, I was wrong about this. Plate of shrimp in the chat clarified. It's actually 10. 10 rocks equals 1 heap. So
nice. I'll stop worrying about that.
Wisconsin was in like a $7 billion budget, and yet a lot of the smaller 2-year trade schools in the UW system and like 4-year engineering schools are losing money. They're firing people. They're, like, leaving, getting less students. And this is because the Republican legislature, didn't increase funding. They decreased it in hopes to get rid of the DEI department. I go here, DEI department's like not that big of a deal. Like if you want to go, you can. If you don't want to go, you can kind of just avoid it. Is it really worth like lowering educational opportunities for people, raising tuitions, and decreasing enrollment in like very important trade schools for the purpose of like ending DEI at a school where the value is still going to be here?
So you're asking the wrong guy. I think that every major
Okay.
university in the United States should cut its entire liberal arts department and tell people to get a life. Meaning that
but I'm saying, but
I mean, again,
there's
it's
right,
like
but there's smaller universities though that
I understand. My feeling about college is very simple. If you are able to get somebody to give you a loan to go to the school because they feel that your degree is then going to allow you a higher
Right.
earning level, then that seems to me a good use of dollars. Subsidizing people's education where a bank would not very often is a giant waste of money. And so the amount of money that's wasted in state schooling systems so that people can get a degree in lesbian dance theory or whatever is silly. And
Right.
furthermore, if you're majoring in engineering, so to give you an
the
example,
money's
I was
not
able to get
going
private
somewhere.
loans to go to Harvard Law School. Why? Because they knew when I got out of the other end of Harvard Law School, I was going to earn a bunch of money because I went to Harvard Law School. Okay, the same thing isn't necessarily true if you're majoring in poli-sci at a state school, right? You're still, dude, I majored in poli-sci too. There we go, bro. So here's the thing. You're going to finish up in poli-sci, and then you're going to go to a real school doing real things.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're probably going to go to law school, or you're going to go work in business, or you're going to get an apprenticeship somewhere. And here's the reality. The entire college system is a credentialing scam. Unless you are in the hard sciences, the entire college system should be done away with, and people should go directly into the workforce where they learn how to do a job.
Yeah. So
That's awesome. So putting this together with, you may have missed this since, from not being on Twitter as much because you make better life choices. But, Shapiro recently infamously said that when he was talking about Social Security and all that stuff, that retirement is stupid anyway, that you just shouldn't stop working, that you have that people have a loss of purpose, whatever, after they retire. Retirement is just dumb as long as you can keep working. So putting these together, right, the Ben Shapiro worldview is that no college, right, straight into the workforce unless you're going to be a lawyer or like some other particularly like prosperous professional. Everybody else, no college for them, straight into the workforce, stay into the workforce until you fucking die. Man, no wonder the Daily Wire gets so much money from billionaires.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, just for fun, these are the most common college majors. I do not see lesbian dance theory on that list.
Damn. Yeah, it should be higher up, I think, right?
Yeah, that's what all the kids are doing in college. They're all taking lesbian dance theory.
I would have majored in that. It was an option at Marlboro College.
I don't even think they offered that where I went. Yeah.
Well, it probably
Business,
falls
health,
under
engineering, biomedical sciences. I'm pretty sure that's the stuff people are all majoring in.
Yeah.
Oh, good God. That's just such a grim worldview. That's like, you're not, it's like just nobody, unless you're going to be a member of the upper middle class when you get out, no education for you. There's you don't actually devoting a few years of your life to reading and thinking and there's not. So now that's just a part of the human experience that you don't get, and unless you're gonna have high enough earning power.
Right. Yeah, and then what if you in that world, what if you go and then you still don't get the job? You just just fucking screwed with everybody else.
Yeah. Also, not that I necessarily want to know the answer to this from Shapiro's point of view, but well, fuck it. While we're at it, why high school?
Yeah, right. Dude, I hated high school. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. A lot of people do. So it's why not just privatize all the high schools that then if you're going to have a high enough earning power, you can get some high school student loans. But otherwise, straight to the coal mine with you.
Yeah, you can go if you're like definitely gonna get a job at like a factory after high school. Otherwise, just go right to the factory.
Yeah. Awesome. Fun world. I just, yeah. Amazing that these views aren't more widely shared. This is obviously just such an appealing vision of the society we want to live in.
Totally.
If you want me to like go back, I can. I feel like you didn't fully answer my question because I'm more saying I agree with you that like trade schools are really important for a community, but I'm saying that the smaller ones rely on like the subsidies from the government to stay afloat, and they're currently not getting it because of like this like moral war between like Robin Voss and the Republicans and the Tony Evers about like DEI here. I feel like there's a ton of people who don't really care and they want to go to a smaller school in their hometown and learn how to do a trade.
I hear you,
and
I'm just saying I'm more extreme than the Republican legislature, and I would slash and burn my way through the college budgets.
Fair enough. All right. All right. Hey, you have a good one.
Hey, Ben Shapiro, I just had a quick question for you. So
I have a question. Can I see your face, or is it like prohibited?
I just don't want to associate my face with like my politics.
Is there a reason for that?
I just don't want like worried about my career. Is that okay?
Well, it depends about what you're about to say.
Okay, so can I just ask it?
Yeah. Again, we just flipped. Remember at the the very first question, his answer, he was big free speech warrior. That it's like very important that it's like it's like people, he hates it that people are afraid to come clean about their conservative beliefs, but good things are changing. And then somebody's afraid that they could have like employment consequences for beliefs that he doesn't like. And he seems to have switched right back. I guess to be fair, it's possible that, I don't know if this is more charitable or less charitable, but it's possible there's a consistent interpretation of everything he said about this, which is that people should be free to say things he likes and not free to say things he doesn't like.
Yeah, that's why he said it depends what you're about to say, because if you happen to be super transphobic supporter of genocide,
come on up, right?
Sad that you can't share your political beliefs without worrying about your job.
Ugh.
Yeah.
You can ask it, and then we'll determine whether you are a person who should not be able to get a job.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So I just want to know, how hard was it to like generate like AI generated images of Hamas?
So you should take off your mask now, because not really because what you're saying is so anti-Semitic, but just because what you're saying is so unbelievably stupid that I hope employers take a good stock of a person who does something so dumb. So mask stays on. Mask stays on. Yeah, I figured. Okay, there was no AI generated image. It is a real image. The way that the game works on Twitter right now, because it's been taken over by a lot of Hamas bots, is that if you put a real image of an atrocity, they will then spam that image with community notes. And they'll do that until the algorithm puts a community note on the image. And then they'll screen cap the community note and pretend that the image was AI generated. That image was not only not AI generated, it was handed to Tony Blinken. That image was specifically, I wasn't the first person to put it out there. That image was tweeted out by the Prime Minister of Israel. So, like, again, this is the amount of just insane bullshit that's being trafficked in this information war is truly astonishing. And the fact that there are people who don't want to show their faces, but they do want to say things like that. Let's just leave it. We'll leave it at that. This does not appear to be a highly intelligent specimen. Okay.
Hey, Ben, my name's Luke, and I'm not scared to show my face out.
I have no idea what specific image he's talking about. This seemed to be a reference. I mean, he seemed to be sure before the guy even got out a sentence what he was talking about. I don't know what he's talking about. I have no idea what
this is. Interesting, by the way.
Yeah.
Knew exactly what he was talking about, but
like a second right. That is it. Yeah, so at least the accusation must have been out there. I don't know. Look, I just want to be fair here because a minute ago, I was saying something that was maybe a little obnoxious, but I think was relevant to what I was saying about something I definitely know more about than Ben Shapiro does. This, I have no fucking clue, but also, it's, I don't think that Benjamin Netanyahu is such a beacon of honesty that the fact that Netanyahu handed it to Blinken is evidence of anything about anything. But look, let's assume for the sake of argument that Lesser Ben is correct, that whatever image he posted that people said was AI generated wasn't really AI generated. Just run with that assumption. Fine. And but it's do you actually think that if somebody is mistaken about that, maybe they don't trust you because they dislike your politics, and also you've said a lot of things in your life that aren't true? Do you think if somebody is mistaken about that because they don't trust you, that they should never be allowed to have a job again? That's pretty fucking authoritarian.
Yeah, totally.
Here.
Well, I appreciate that.
Disregarding the popularity going into the 2024 election, who do you believe it would be best fit to be the next president of the United States?
Who'd be best fit to be? I mean, putting aside the
Other than
popular.
yourself.
I'm not running. It sounds like the most miserable job in the world, by the way. It sounds absolutely miserable, and I have 4 kids, and I'm very busy. But in any case, who would be the best president and who is likely to win are obviously 2 very different questions. The person I believe would be the best president right now, it would be DeSantis. I think DeSantis has been an excellent and effective governor of my home state of Florida. I think that he's done a terrific job in mobilizing the executive branch in order to get done what he needs to get done. He knows how to govern. He knows how to actually do the administrative duties that the executive branch is supposed to carry forth. Who is most likely to win at this point? If you had asked me 4 months ago, I would have said that Biden had a clear advantage, because the fact is that Donald Trump lost the last election cycle. And so the idea that he was going to suddenly flip a huge percentage of the electorate in his favor, being as toxic personally as he is, according to the polling data, I thought that was kind of a fool's errand. Now, is it possible that Joe Biden is just such a bad president that it flips over to Trump? It's certainly possible. Now, it's a little bit early to say. The reason I'm saying it's early to say is because right now, all of the focus is on how terrible everything is in the world. I mean, you walk into the daily headlines and it's like that dog meme in the middle of the burning building, right? It's like everything is just on fire and terrible. But after a year of nothing but Donald Trump in court saying ridiculous things, is the focus on Election Day going to be on Trump, or is it going to be on Biden? Again, my simple sort of binary here is that whichever candidate the election is a referendum on will lose. If it's a referendum on Biden, he will lose. If it's a referendum on Trump, he will lose. I think the Republicans are making an error by nominating somebody who has such high levels of toxicity with the American public. I think if you ran generic Republican against Biden, I think that generic Republican wins. I've said first party to sanity wins, but it looks like both parties are bound and determined to run directly headlong into trees. And so it's, amusing, but not all that amusing. It's a serious world.
Thank you.
I don't really know that I have a lot to say about that. I think that's probably the least objectionable answer that Shapiro has given. I mean, obviously, some of what he's considering insane or whatever is just stuff that's not conservative enough for him. So I don't agree with that. But the idea that whoever the election ends up feeling like a referendum on is probably going to lose, actually don't really think is wrong. It is kind of amazing. It has consistently for a while been kind of amazing that both parties are insisting on nominating people whose negatives are as high as they are. That I think it actually is probably true from what I've seen in both directions, that if the Democrats nominated almost anybody but Biden, they would have a much better chance of beating Trump. That generic Democrat kicks Trump's ass in the polls, but Biden does not, right? But it's also true that Biden is an unpopular president, and and he's widely perceived as being way too old and all that stuff. So it's that if some asshole like Nikki Haley had won the Republican nomination, they would probably win. Right. I think that's all true. And kind of incredibly depressing because it really tells you something about what a like ridiculous half democratic system this is, that like we, you know, that like the only realistic choices are the person who won the Republican nomination, the person who won the Democratic nomination. People can't just like do ranked choice voting or something like that, because you know, if so, I don't if we did have that, I don't think either of these people would win.
Yeah, I agree.
Howdy.
Over the last couple of weeks, I've heard you make multiple justifications for the carnage, the death, the despair, the now over 10,000 Palestinian people that have been slaughtered, refugee camps that have been bombed with 1-ton bombs, US-made bombs, people picking up the body parts of their children and putting them in bags because they can't find every bit of their family's remains. And you have made the justification that it's worth it if Hamas is wiped out. I want to do a thought experiment for the audience. You push a button right now, Hamas is gone from the earth. Call it whatever you want, it's gone. What do Israeli-Palestinian relations look like?
So the answer is that it.
No, I'm going to tell you the answer.
Well, then that's not a question.
No, that was my framing of the question.
At a certain
So
point,
the
as long
answer-
as you get to a question mark at the end, we're good.
There's a question.
Okay.
What is
Sometime in the near future.
What does the West Bank look like? Who administers the West Bank?
You know, I got the question.
It's the Palestinian Authority who cooperates. They're docile. They work with the Israeli government.
In what way?
And what do you see in the West Bank? Day in, day out, ethnic cleansing. People getting kicked out of their homes. In the middle of the night, the Israeli Defense Force.
Is
the
there a
Orwellian, listen.
Okay.
The
No, I
question's
know.
coming very soon, sir. I appreciate your time. Listen. People being pulled out of their homes, watching their homes demolished while their children cry.
Where's the question?
The question is, do Palestinians have the right to defend themselves?
So, can I ask a quick counter question? If by Palestinians defending themselves, is Hamas a terrorist group?
Sure.
Should Hamas surrender tomorrow?
It's not for me to say.
Okay, so.
Should Israel stop dropping one-ton
hold
bombs?
up a second.
No.
You got to talk for several minutes and spew complete bullshit. So now it's my turn. So because that's how this works. This is a dialogue.
Yeah. Let's just pause here to say that the direct question that the guy ended with was, do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? And I'm going to be real curious to hear if Ben ever answers that question.
Yeah, I'm surprised also how poorly he's handling this questioner. Like, you would think that he can like get this stuff all the time doing what he does and be pretty used to it, and to quickly just go to like even people who are like annoying and upset to just quickly go to like saying what they're saying is bullshit and like nonsense and like crazy or whatever, you know. It's just like I don't know, I would just think he has something better prepared than like that's fucking bullshit, man.
Yeah. No,
doing as much as he does.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, like, obviously this is a college student. He doesn't do this like all the time, you know. I mean, like, again, this might very well be the first time he's ever asked a question at a public event, but it is probably a tactical mistake to have a question like embedded in the middle of the question, right? Because that gives
an answer.
yeah. Like what he should have just said was, oh, even if you could press this button, Hamas, you know, that like Israel would continue occupying and oppressing Palestinians, right? And given that, do you think they have a right to defend themselves, right? If he'd said that, he wouldn't have given Shapiro quite the opening that he did. Because like when you have an actual like question mark in the middle and it's a Q&A, then like you give him the opening to be like, well, okay, I'm trying to answer your question, right? Like, so I think that was just kind of badly done. And like, also, I think given that he just, especially because he already said yes to Hamas, a terrorist organization, I think, you know, if he was going to do that, I mean, he might as well just say yes to the surrender question too, and just like be like, you know, because like clearly all of this is just giving Ben something else to focus on because he doesn't want to actually answer the question.
Right.
Like he doesn't actually want to say, because yeah, it's a really good question, right? If you're going to constantly talk about Israel's right to defend itself, right? Okay, do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? What does that entail? You clearly think that Israel's right to defend itself extends to expelling 1.9 million people from their homes and, killing tens of thousands to get, however many Hamas fighters you think that's gotten, right? So it's like, man, that is quite an extensive definition of self-defense. Now I really want to hear what Palestinian self-defense would give them a right to do, right? Like, and that's a really good question, and I think that again, this is not just like say like, I don't want to dunk on this kid too much because like I think he is asking a really good question, and also I think if he's not quite asking it right, like that's just because he probably doesn't do this very much. But I'm just like a little bit frustrated because I think he's giving Shapiro some openings to dodge like the core of the very good question that he's asking.
Totally, yeah.
No, so let me explain. Okay, here's my perspective. My perspective on this is very clear, which is that what is happening right now in Gaza is horrific and a tragedy, and every ounce of blood that is being spilled is on Hamas. Hamas initiated this conflict. There was a ceasefire all the way up till October 6th. On October 7th, they stormed into Israel, murdered 1,500 people, and took 200 people hostage back into Gaza. They then planted themselves in terror tunnels that they've spent billions of dollars building, that they robbed from their own population, underneath civilian populations, including the Al-Shifa hospital. They have hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel underneath Al-Shifa hospital being used solely and completely to fund their terrorism. And you say Hamas should not surrender. Now, here's the deal. The minute Hamas surrenders, the bloodshed stops. It is that simple. As far as the Palestinian Authority has on its books laws that pay terrorists who kill Jews. They do get actual stipends that outgross the actual yearly earnings of Palestinians. Don't shake your head at me when what you're saying is factually untrue. So what is going to happen next after Hamas is gone? The answer very much depends on whether the Palestinians ever decide to put in place a government that is willing to not attempt to genocidally exterminate the Jews. Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip in 2005 completely. There were no Jews in the Gaza Strip in 2006.
The United Nations Security Council still considers them an effective occupier when they control the ports, the air spaces, all the territorial
Okay, so number
land.
one, you have to control.
Incorrect. They're incorrect on that fact.
On what
you're
fact?
presenting as a fact.
On
It's
what
not a
fact?
fact?
They did pull out.
They pulled out physically, but
But not mentally or emotionally.
No.
Okay.
I just explained how they did pull out.
As far as the ports,
Yeah, that's been like pretending to score rhetorical points, not to understand a distinction he understands perfectly well, right? Because literally the student just explained it, right? That they have it's like, yes, they pulled out ground troops and settlers, but what they didn't do was relinquish control over the ports, the airspace, the land border, what could come in and out, whether Palestinians could even like walk too close to the fence, like in the Great March of Return in 2018, when numerous Palestinians were shot to death unarmed for walking too close to the border of the Gaza Strip, right? Hadn't stepped outside of it, right? Just getting too close to the border itself.
Some were shot from 300 meters away.
Yeah. I mean, this is like clearly, yes, this is still a form of occupation. And that's obviously what he means, that Israel was exerting very tight control in numerous ways over the territory, despite not having ground troops or settlers there. But this is why, look, I'll give him credit for the few exceptions that he's made, but this is why for the most part, Ben Shapiro doesn't debate adults, right? Like, or, whatever, not that you're not an adult if you're, 19-year-old college student, but, he doesn't debate people who are anywhere close to his age, right? Like
or who get paid to like, or are credentialed.
Yeah, do it for a living, for sure, right? Yeah, no question. I mean,
reading and writing about it all the time, scholars like.
Yeah, because what he wants to do is to jump on sloppy word choices to score rhetorical points, not engage with the substance of the actual argument that they're making, right? He invoked logic earlier. He didn't know how to fit this into logic. It's like, well, look, you're actually interested in doing logic. In other words, you're interested in thinking about the structure of arguments. That's the exact opposite of ignoring the substantive point and jumping on the word physically in order to score this, little rhetorical, oh, so you mean mentally, emotionally? It's like, no, he means tightly controlling the air, land, and sea borders, what gets in and out, who's allowed to, even while remaining within it, to walk too close to the edge of it, very frequently killing people there, et cetera, exerting numerous layers of control over the territory through military force. That's obviously what he means. And it's just really, I don't know. I hate to say that anything's beneath him, but it should be, right? Like even given the role that he's acting like he's playing, this should be beneath him.
Yeah. Dude, this crowd has the worst sense of humor too. Just the dumbest sense of humor. He's not even like making jokes, It's just like he's just like reacting and they're just laughing. It's like anytime he like swears or anything at somebody, they're like oh, it's like,
yeah, they're just doing laughter to reward swagger.
Yeah, he's got to work on material. Yeah.
As far as the airspace, of course, they have to prevent the shipment in of weaponry. Why? Because every single dollar that went into the Gaza Strip was used to build the greatest terror base on planet Earth, and we're watching the consequences of that right this very instant. Israel has complete air superiority over the Gaza Strip. If Israel truly wanted to commit human rights violation, they could literally turn the place into glass tomorrow. They're not doing that.
Listen to me. The West Bank, explain the settlements. That's Hamas's fault.
What? First, okay. So first, you need to. So first, can we finish with the? Are we done with Gaza?
Yeah, it's also incredibly revealing that he's playing this. Oh, sorry, you want to move on to a new topic? Are we done with the old one? He never answered the question. The original question was, in fact, not only did he never, he didn't really answer even the question in the middle, right? The student asked rhetorically, what would happen after Hamas was gone? He was like, oh, that depends on the Palestinians. Like, well, okay. Would have been nice to explore that. So your position is that if there aren't Palestinian leaders who offer a deal that's adequate, therefore it's okay to continue to rule over millions of people who aren't citizens in your state. Because, if you're going to say that, yeah, I really want you to own that, right? That it's okay for millions of people to be denied basic democratic rights because of their ethnicity, as that, yeah, sure, we'd make a 2-state deal with them if they had good enough leaders. But if they don't have good enough leaders, because we can't make them citizens of Israel without threatening the Jewish nature of the state, then it's perfectly okay to just continue to deny them, basic civil and human rights for, God knows, however long it takes. Right. Yeah, that's a morally loathsome position. And he went by it very quickly. But also the actual question that the student ended with was, do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? He just never answered.
Yeah, he also said Gaza is the greatest terror base on Earth, which, it's sort of low-hanging fruit to point this out, probably to, to the audience, just obviously, the term terrorism is violence directed at civilians for a political purpose. And that's exactly what Israel's doing,
Yeah, right.
So that's that's not an earth-shattering note, but I do think
no, but it is worth saying. I mean, this goes back to the very first, what we were saying about his opening statement, that in his worldview, the worst you can say of anything that the United States or Israel does is there was an error, right?
Yeah.
People point to the errors made by the idea to try to draw a retroactive moral equivalency between, Israel and its genocidal neighbors. So it's okay, killing 695 civilians. Again, I believe that's the current Israeli estimate. I'm just running with that, right? Killing 695 civilians is genocidal killing tens of thousands of civilians, intentionally starving hundreds of thousands more, and displacing millions from their homes. That's just an error.
Yeah.
We're done with Gaza. So now we're moving to the West Bank. Of course, you're not going to separate them fully because you won't even say that Hamas should surrender.
I'm not in charge of Hamas.
That's such a ridiculous answer.
I'm not.
You're not in charge of Israel either, but you're dictating policy.
That's right.
As far
You never answered my question.
I'm happy to answer your question.
Do Palestinians have the right to defend themselves?
If by defend themselves you mean murder innocent civilians, then no, they do not. Well, clearly you do, because you don't want Hamas to surrender. That's what they are doing. They are murdering innocent Israeli civilians. They're murdering innocent Palestinian civilians. They're murdering anyone they can find. They're literally shooting people on the roads from North Gaza to South Gaza right now to tell them to go back and act as human shields for their rockets. That is what Hamas is doing right now, and you won't call on them to surrender. I'm done with this guy. We're done. We're done.
You're not done.
We're done. Yes, I am.
No, we're not.
Goodbye.
Wow, that was pathetic.
Yeah.
Like he says,
the
so
on rockets things, that's pretty out
Oh,
there.
So, sorry, which was this?
Oh, maybe it's not this statement. He says something about how Hamas is planting children on rockets.
Oh, yeah. I think that is Ben's extremely dumb way of saying, like, I think he's just doing the human shielding thing. I think it's just a rhetorical flourish, right? Like, I don't
really meant it literally.
Yeah.
He very well. It's more likely to be right about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't tell. I mean, if he does mean it literally, that's a new one to me. But but I took him to just be like, this is his like little rhetorical flourish for saying the human shielding thing, which of course, Amnesty International has repeatedly investigated, and they, after the previous wars between Israel and Hamas, and 2009, 2014, and they accused Hamas of various other violations of the laws of war, but they actually cleared them on human shielding. They said they didn't see any evidence of Hamas directing the movements of civilians to protect military operations. Whereas, right, there is actually a history of the IDF doing exactly that, right? Doing things like forcing Palestinian civilians at gunpoint to approach homes for them because they think that the people inside those homes are less likely to shoot at a Palestinian civilian than an Israeli soldier. And, I think that back in like 10 or 20 years ago, I believe the Israeli High Court that Netanyahu wants to disempower said that they couldn't do that. So like, as a matter of policy, they're not supposed to anymore. But B'Tselem, which is one of the major Israeli human rights organizations, said they're definitely, documented instances of it happening since the court ruling. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I've seen video footage from this war of that happening. I think the human shielding thing is, again, this is like even, the allegation that Hamas is doing that isn't, is not verified. I mean, who knows? Wait for the investigation this time, but those accusations have never turned out to be true before. And in fact, are made hypocritically by, defenders of the IDF. And also, like the more important point to me is that it's like, look, even if we pretended for the sake of argument that Hamas was doing that, that wouldn't justify any of this, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the point that Anna Kasparian made on the PBD podcast, right? She asked Patrick Bet-David, Patrick Bet-David was saying the human shielding thing, and she was like, okay, hey, you mentioned your mom earlier in the conversation. Imagine that in a hostage situation, a terrorist or bank robber or somebody like grabbed your mom to use her as an actual literal human shield. Would you be okay with shooting that guy through her?
Yeah.
And he just refused to answer the question because obviously he has no answer. None of these people have an answer to that question, right? It's like they, somebody
want the answer, which is like, of course I wouldn't want my mom in that situation,
Yeah. If somebody whose life you actually valued was literally being used as a human shield, you absolutely wouldn't think that justified disregarding their life, right? Like, nobody would be like, oh well, she's being used as a human shield. Sorry, mom. Like that's if a Hamas fighter, were had infiltrated, like on October 7th had was actually literally using an Israeli civilian as a human shield, right? Then, actually I think there are incidents where those people were shot, it's the Hannibal doctrine, all that. But but by and large, that would have been a scandal, right? If it turned out for sure that they just shot the Hamas fighter through the Israeli civilian. Like, obviously, if somebody whose life you value is being used as a human shield, you're not just like, whatever. Yeah. That means nothing that happens to them is my fault. I'm just going to totally disregard whether they live or die, right? That's a completely morally bankrupt idea. And also, of course, the idea that what they really mean when they say human shielding is not anything that's at all literal. What they really mean is just that there's Hamas military stuff close to Palestinian civilian stuff, which it's yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And also in the United States of America, there's plenty of military stuff that's close to civilian stuff. And that's the United States of America, which is one of the most spacious countries on the planet. There's certainly military stuff next to civilian stuff in, say, Israel, which is much more densely populated than the U.S. So the building in Tel Aviv where Netanyahu meets with his war cabinet, the Kiryat, non-Jerusalem, this one is in Tel Aviv, is it's right in the heart of downtown Tel Aviv. All the major bus lines go by it all the time. There's a big hospital right next to it, by the way, connected to the Kiryat by tunnels. There are the schools are right by there. There's a huge shopping mall across the street where, an Israeli friend told me once that there's it's not uncommon to see uniformed soldiers having lunch, at the shopping mall, right? So it's oh, does that mean that Israel's doing human shielding? And if you just drop 2,000-ton bombs downtown Tel Aviv, right. That well, what are you going to do? They're using human shields. It's this, nobody actually applies consistent standards to this. It's complete bullshit. But again, the real thing is what he was doing there and all of that posturing and blustering that he just did is refusing to answer this kid's question. Right? It's do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? When he asked it the second time, he was well, not if you mean killing civilians. Well, hold up. How about?
He said, I don't.
Yeah. The student said, no, that's not what I mean. Right. And then he just pretended that it's oh, you said Hamas wouldn't surrender. And, actually he didn't say one way or the other. Again, I think it was a mistake, but it's he's clearly saying something much stronger than the student actually said about that. And then he, it's okay, forget it. Let's say Hamas does surrender. Do you think other Palestinian organizations would then have a right to defend themselves against Israeli occupation, right? That they, let's say they only attack military targets. Would you, Ben Shapiro, really be okay with that? Of course you wouldn't, right? How about if they were exactly as careful to avoid civilian casualties in Israel as Israel is being right now in Gaza?
Yeah.
Would you be okay with that?
I don't understand why he doesn't just say no.
Yeah.
I mean, the answers he gives are not much better than just being no, I don't think they should have a right to defend themselves.
Because he doesn't have the courage of his position. He doesn't he knows it would sound bad if he said that. So he's just going to bluster and he's just going to pretend not to understand what the student means by physically occupying. He refused, right? The student kept trying to be okay, can we talk about the West Bank? And he just refused to do that. When you can see why, right? Because the Hamas excuse doesn't work in the West Bank, right? There is no Hamas present. Hamas does not run the West Bank, right? This is so Hamas is not carrying out operations from the West Bank, right? This is so it's the Hamas excuse applies to nothing that's happening in the West Bank, and the stuff the student was bringing up, which is very real, about Israeli settler pogroms against Palestinians in the West Bank. That actually, this is one of the reasons that October 7th happened, Like if you look at the Hamas statement about it, which is just, I know you're not supposed to do that because, they, I don't know. It's like the post 9/11 thing about they just hate us for our freedom. Right. I mean, I think I might've brought this up in one of the past ones I did with you, but it's like, I always think about that, David Cross bit about that, one of his stand-up albums, where it's like, oh, they just hate us for our freedom. Really? That's why 9/11 happened. They hate us for our freedom. Because I thought it was because of our support for Saudi Arabia. And he lists off all this stuff. You know why I thought that's why Osama bin Laden attacked us? Because that's what he said. Right?
Yeah.
Like, this is so it's like, same reasoning. You don't have to morally justify it. Just like, if you want to know what the stated motivation was, which, these people are always interested in the stated motivation when it's like the original Hamas charter, right? But like nothing since then counts. And, it's like, if you want to know what the stated motivation was, part of it was retaliation for the pogroms against Palestinians in the West Bank, which were really bad in 2023, worst year ever, well before October 7th, that drove out most Palestinian inhabitants from an area that's almost 10% of the West Bank. And obviously Shapiro doesn't have a defense for that. That's why he was like, oh, I'm just done with this guy. Right. Because what's he going to say? I mean, when the Hamas defense doesn't work, right? Like, then what else are you going to say? I mean, like, you're just down to saying what he really believes, which is, I'm just a hardcore ethnic nationalist. And I think that, because of the Bible, or because of, because this is just the tribe I identify with, or, because of, whatever the justification is, I just clearly believe that, Jewish people have a right to all of this land and Palestinian people have a right to none of it. Right. I mean, that's obviously what he believes. Right. Like, but he just doesn't, he's just not confident enough in it, or he doesn't have he just doesn't have the integrity to like own it. When like, if he said that, even a lot of people who are cheering for him would be like, wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, all right. We should, we have about 19 minutes left. I know I've been going really slowly through this part because it's just that last question in particular. Just like every 45 seconds, I was like, no, this gotta stop talking about this, but we can go through the rest of it more quickly. But it is well after 10 o'clock on the East Coast. We should switch to the post game for patrons. That's not been posted yet, but it will be within like 90 seconds of this stream ending, if not earlier. So in any case, so if you are a patron, like I said, within like 2 minutes, you should have the link, and we'll go straight into that pretty quickly. And then we'll watch the last 20 minutes there. If you are not a patron, no time like the present, patreon.com/Ben Burgis, monthly cost of a milkshake at a 50th Nostalgia Diner in 1994. Then you get for that $5 access to the exclusive post games Monday and Thursday nights. In this particular case, on Friday night, access to the Discord server. Sometimes you get exclusive or advanced access to things. Mostly you get our undying love and gratitude for helping us to keep this thing going. So if you are a patron, we'll see you in the post game. If you are not, then I will see you on Monday when we're back with Matt McManus. But until then, and I guess very, very last thing, should do one last plug for anybody who missed it at the beginning. Next Thursday, if you are in the mid to eastern Michigan, going to be speaking at Wayne State University on pretty much the exact topic that we were just covering. So that's 6 p.m. at Old Main, room 103 at Wayne State University on Thursday, March 21st. So we'll see some of you in person there. If you're a patron, I will see you virtually in the post game in about 2 minutes. Left is best.